I know a little of this man, Sandor Clegane. He was Prince Joffrey's sworn shield for many a year, and even here we would hear tell of his deeds, both good and ill. If even half of what we heard was true, this was a bitter, tormented soul, a sinner who mocked both gods and men. He served, but found no pride in service. He fought, but took no joy in victory. He drank, to drown his pain in a sea of wine. He did not love, nor was he loved himself. It was hate that drove him. Though he committed many sins, he never sought forgiveness. Where other men dream of love and wealth or glory, this man Sandor Clegane dreamed of slaying his own brother. A sin so terrible it makes me shudder just to speak of it. Yet that was the bread that nourished him, the fuel that kept his fires burning. Ignoble as it was, the hope of seeing his brother's blood upon his blade was all this sad and angry creature lived for. And even that was taken from him, when Prince Oberyn of Dorne stabbed Sir Gregor with a poisoned spear. Sandor Clegane, or the Hound, is a character who represents some of the story's criticisms to his heart, being the primary example of Martin's criticism of not only chivalric ideals of knighthood, but even our modern ideals of strength and heroism. We see a man brought to his absolute worst by the situation around him, turning into a lost and violent madman who despises the society and people who made him this way. But the series' cynical critique of certain societal values and traditions is balanced out with an optimistic view on humans and their potential to be good, regardless of the society that restricts them. With some close examination, you can see that the Hound is at his core a kind and scared young child who has protected himself through cynicism and nihilism, but it remains to be seen whether or not he can bring himself to be the true hero that he'd once idealized. When he was a child, he and Gregor were gifted toys from a woodcarver, and Sandor took the knight from him. He could have taken any of them, but the knight somehow called to him more than the others. Any boy in the Seven Kingdoms grew up with an ideal of knighthood and aspired to be like the heroes from the stories. But Gregor's violent retaliation left him with not only a burn, but the harsh reminder that knights are nothing like the heroes from stories. All of them are tools of violence, whose only requirement is the ability to spill blood. We know that both his sister and his father died mysteriously, leading some to suggest that Gregor could have killed them to gain the inheritance. Either way, this would have implanted the idea to young Sandor that violence is the way of the world, and the only way to deal with the unfortunate hand of fate was to enact violence on those he sees fit, especially upon his brother, through revenge. He adheres to this principle as he rises into service of King Robert, being able to rise up the ranks by being the strongest and most brutal warrior there. And to survive with this turmoil, he drinks constantly and begins to call himself a hound, the purpose being to exact violence at the command of authority. We, the reader, are introduced to him when he mercilessly kills Micah, who's obviously innocent to anyone except Joffrey. He doesn't enjoy these types of killings, and despite him boasting about it later, it becomes clear that he doesn't follow his orders because of duty or pleasure. He boasts about his violence to those he claims to dislike, people who seem innocent, who haven't seen the corruption of knighthood the way he has. He tries to frighten Arya, Sansa, lords and ladies and knights who he thinks haven't seen the real world. He wants to not only expose them to the truth, but he also finds some pleasure in bringing others the same pain he had to experience as a child. But the next time we see him contrasts with the initial impression we get of him. As Gregor attacks Loras, Sandor steps in to protect him. He's terrified of Gregor and has no reason to think he could win. Yet something compels him to protect Loras. When Loras and the crowd congratulate him, he looks confused and uncomfortable, and tries to avoid taking credit for his actions. Deep within, he has the urge to do good for the sake of it, while his pessimism and hatred bar him from ever truly accepting that he can have a positive impact.
Give me my life, sir.
I'm no sir.
Sandor spends most of his time in King's Landing protecting Sansa, against both Joffrey and the mobs during the riot. It is possible to read their relationship as romance, but I see it as more of a deconstruction of the idea of a knight winning the love of a princess. As much as he tries to save her, downplaying his efforts as always, they both need something that neither one can provide. Sandor needs genuine love, which he's been denied his whole life, which Sansa's too young and too traumatized to fully give to him. She, meanwhile, needs a hero like one from the songs, who Sandor has become disillusioned with. Though neither one can be enough for the other yet, they can push each other along on their journeys and out of the situations they need to escape from. One scene that illustrates this is when Sandor appears in her room during the Battle of the Blackwater. I might be making a stretch, but just a few chapters earlier, Sansa had dreamt for a knight to save her, though none arrived. That night, Sansa dreamt of the riot again. The mob surged around her, shrieking, a maddened beast with 1,000 faces. Everywhere she turned, she saw faces twisted into monstrous, inhuman masks. She wept, and told them she has never done them hurt, yet they dragged her from her horse all the same. "No," she cried. "No, please, don't. But no one paid her any heed. She shouted for Sir Dantos, for her brothers, for her dead father and her dead wolf, for gallant Sir Loras, who'd given her a red rose once, but none of them came. She called for the heroes from the songs, for Florian and Sir Ryan Redwine and Prince Aemon the Dragon Knight, but no one heard. Women swarmed over her like weasels, pinching her legs and kicking her in the belly, and someone hit her in the face and she felt her teeth shatter. Then she saw the bright glimmer of steel. The knife plunged into her belly and tore until there was nothing left of her down there but shiny red ribbons. After this, she finds blood in her sheets and throws them into the fire to hide them. If what we know about blood magic still applies here, then royal blood plus fire is the recipe for magic, so she might have had her wish granted, though obviously not how she expected. Sandor's come out of fear and desperation away from the fire, his trauma bringing him back to his childlike state of fear. He still needs love, but Sansa can only provide him with the song. Her hymn is a prayer to the mother to soothe the wrath and tame the fury, but it remains to be seen whether her wish will come true. George has mentioned one detail from that scene that might have come from an unreliable narrator, and will be important in the future. Sansa remembers kissing Sandor, though he doesn't. This may just seem like she remembered her fantasy as reality, but this might not be the case. Twice, Sandor gave her his cloak. The first time was in the throne room when Joffrey stripped her, and the second time was after he left her room. Sansa keeps the cloak afterwards. In the Faith of the Seven, the marriage ritual requires both a kiss and for the groom to give the bride a cloak that represents his protection. To Sansa, marrying Sandor will be the escape to all her problems and ensure that she's always protected by him. But all that he can do is give her protection, knowing that neither one of them is really enough for each other. After fleeing to the Riverlands, he meets Arya, who fulfills a similar role to Sansa. While Sandor sought to disprove Sansa's childish idea of knighthood, Arya is fueled by the same vengeful desire that Sandor's carried most of his life. He knows that she'll end up just as bad as him, but isn't at a point yet where he's wise enough to counsel her out of it. Instead, he takes her on a tour of his suffering, ferrying her around through the aimless violence his revenge has taken him to. Especially with the stranger, the symbol of death, being his horse. This symbolically seems like the Grim Reaper, bringing her on a tour of death. When he battles Beric Dondarrion, his trauma brings him back to his young self, scared and yearning for help. His fear of fire, as well as the constant hatred by those around him, comes full force, and for a moment, he breaks his shell of arrogance and spite. When he fully embodies the Hound, a merciless killer despised by everyone around him, he cracks and reverts back to his original self. Lord Beric's knees folded slowly, as if for prayer. When his mouth opened, only blood came out. The Hound's sword was still in him as he toppled face forward. The dirt drank his blood. Beneath the hollow hill, there was no sound, but the soft crackling of flames and the whimper the Hound made when he tried to rise. Arya could only think of Micah and all the stupid prayers she'd prayed for the Hound to die. If there were gods, why didn't Lord Beric win? She knew the Hound was guilty. "Please," Sandor Clegane rasped, cradling his arm. "I'm burned. Help me. Someone help me." He was crying. "Please." Arya looked at him in astonishment. He's crying like a little baby, she thought. After a fight with multiple men in an inn, Sandor's left dying from the infected wounds he suffered. First he tells Arya, "I hate liars. I hate gutless frauds even worse." While he's talking about Arya here, he's really projecting himself and his self-hatred. After losing his purpose in King's Landing, he's been ridiculed and despised by everyone from the Brotherhood to the small folk, regardless of his actions. He's become the Hound they all say he is, but when the outward layer breaks, he has nothing inside past the hatred and arrogance. His only escape from his struggles was the hope from killing Gregor, but that's been taken away from him as well. He begs for Arya to give him the gift of death, to end the life which to him has no value or purpose anymore. But she doesn't even consider him worthy of an easy death, leaving him out to die in the crossroads. This is supposed to be the end to his story in the books, but the prevailing theory is that he still survives on the Quiet Isle. Brienne notices a certain gravedigger who's taller than her, while the elder brother's talking about Sandor's supposed death. He mentions Sandor's struggle with rage and love, saying that he watched his death. But it's more likely he was speaking metaphorically, and the death he speaks of is the death of the Hound, and a chance to create a new life. It appears that he's likely been tasked to dig the graves for everyone he's killed, finally understanding the weight of his actions, rather than mindlessly obeying orders. If all this is true, then Sansa's prayer was completed, and Sandor's finally had his wrath tamed. Meanwhile, the Hound helm has been passed around a few times, leading to Lem Lemoncloak, who's currently working with Lady Stoneheart. Should he lose the helm, I believe that Brienne will take up the role as the Hound for a certain role in the story. Jaime called her the Hound with Teats, and a significant part of her story is coming to understand the Hound through what she hears from others. She even suffers a similar facial scarring to him. While some believe that Sandor himself will fight for the Seven against Gregor, I think that he has to put aside his desire for vengeance, while Brienne winning the battle would be a symbolic victory of pure, honest knighthood. It is also said that no man can kill the mountain, which would make Brienne's victory even more poetic. As for Sandor himself, I think his story's not quite finished on the Quiet Isle. Without a POV dedicated to him, he pretty much has to have a reunion with Sansa, being the one to save her from the Eyrie. But after that, I think he'll need to decide where his abilities can be best put to use. He has the potential to rediscover the ideals of knighthood he's shown but repressed, and the power to use his strength for a greater purpose. Whether that means saving Sansa, battling the others, or both, He'll finally overcome his pessimism and become the kind of knight Westeros really needs. Sandor the Hound has shown arrogance, nihilism, cynicism, and a general disregard for his own life without his motivation of revenge. But he has within him an understanding that he can go past his hatred and become a force for good despite his past. With Sansa's prayer, he's calmed his rage and atoned for his sin, losing the persona of the beast he latched onto. And while his story was one of suffering and death, with that comes the possibility for a new life and redemption.